when it comes to the teachings of Jesus, one of the most popular topics that Jesus teaches on is on the topic of generosity. And the reason why he spends so much time on this particular topic is he recognizes that nothing contends for our heart quite like money and quite like greed. And we saw even a few weeks ago that Jesus warns us that the ultimate goal of money in our life is to be the God over our lives. And he tells us, he says, hey, you cannot serve both God and money. You're gonna have to choose one. They both cannot be your God. You can't do it. And what money often tries to do is it tries to sit on the throne of our hearts as the king of our lives. It tries to be our God. And far too often what we think is we think that we own our possessions, but the reality is that far too often our possessions actually own us and they become our God. And so all series long we've been talking about how do we kill the idol of greed in our life. And what we found is that the only antidote to greed is radical biblical generosity. And so all series long, we've been talking about what does it mean to kill this idol through the means of generosity. And today, as we continue in this series, we're going to continue to unpack this idea of generosity. But here's what we're also going to see. What we're also going to see is we're going to see what it looks like to really go all in with Jesus. You see, whenever we were fleshing out this sermon series months ago, this was the Sunday that I was the most excited about. And the reason why is because this Sunday, not only does it continue to help us understand how to kill the idol of greed through generosity, but it also shows us a beautiful picture of the essence of the gospel and what the gospel invites every single one of us to do, and that is full, wholehearted surrender at the feet of Jesus Christ. And so I'm excited about jumping into this time that we have together. If you have a Bible with you, go ahead and open up to the Gospel of Mark. We're gonna be in Mark chapter 12 together today, looking at verses 41 through 44. If you don't have a Bible with you, we'll have the verses on the screen behind me, so you can easily follow along. And if you don't own a Bible, like a physical copy of God's word, we'd love to give you one. You can visit our hospitality kiosk or our connections lobby before you leave today and pick up a free copy. Mark chapter 12 is where we're gonna be. We're gonna start in verse 41. And as you're turning there, here's a quick background of where we are. We are at this moment in the last couple of weeks of the life of Jesus before he gets to the cross. We're in the last week of all of that. Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's teaching in the temple, and the temple was the place of worship for the Jews in the Old Testament. This is where you would bring sacrifices to God. And Jesus is in the temple, he's teaching in the temple, and then what he does is he takes a break from teaching and he begins to observe the worship of the people in the temple. And that's what we see starting in verse 41. Here's what it says. It says, and he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums. And so stop there for a minute. What we see right here is Mark, what he's doing is he's setting the scene for us to see what's about to take place. And what we see is that there are many people in the temple. They are expressing their worship to God through the means of generosity and through the means of giving. And he's saying that there's many people giving large sums of money and placing it in what is referred to as the offering box. Now, when it comes to the offering box, what we know from historians is that the offering box looked something like this, okay? You hit that next slide. This is what an offering box typically looked like. It had this trumpet-like receptacle at the top of the box. And the reason why it was shaped this way is so that, one, it was easy to put money in and made it very difficult for anyone to reach down and take money out. So it was a security thing. But here's what's interesting about this little trumpet receptacle thing. Whenever that was built, it was built with using one of two different types of metal, either silver or gold. Now, here's why that's important. The reason why that's important to know is because at this point in time, the money that people had was also made of metal, predominantly silver, okay? We didn't have paper money at this point. There was no cryptocurrency or digital money, none of that kind of stuff. You couldn't Venmo the temple. It was all metal money, which means that when you put metal money in a metal receptacle, it makes a noise as it goes down. It was inevitable. And so if you were to put a large sum of money in, it would sound like applause going down, okay? It would make a lot of sound. Think if you were at a casino, which I know none of us ever go to, but imagine if you were and someone was playing slots and they hit the slot machine and the alarms are going off and there's coins falling everywhere, right? That's the idea of what's happening here, okay? And so here's the thing, when you would come to the temple and you would give, everyone knew how much you gave. Everyone knew. Why? Because they could hear it. It either made a lot of noise or it didn't make hardly any noise at all. And what Mark tells us here, that there are a lot of rich people giving a lot of money, which means that in the temple at this point in time, there was a lot of noise filling up the temple. I mean, just applause after applause after applause, all over with just people pouring it in. And as we see this, I think what we can easily run to, kind of the cynical part of our brain, is to think the only reason these rich people were giving large sums of money is because they wanted the applause, right? Like they wanted all the attention to be on themselves. But here's the thing that we need to understand. Rich people should give a lot of money, right? Like that sentence makes sense. It would be concerning if the passage said there's a lot of rich people giving not a lot of money, right? What we saw last week is that God entrusts things to us, that we're to be faithful with what he's given us. And so it makes sense that there's a lot of rich people giving a lot of money. The reason why Mark frames this up is because in contrast to many rich people giving large sums, Jesus' attention turns not to the person who gives the most, but interestingly enough, the person who gave the least. Look at verse 42. It says, and a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. Now this woman, as she comes to the offering box, okay, what she places in seems to be incredibly insignificant, especially in comparison to what everyone else was putting in. So just imagine the scene. People are dumping money, right? Like you can hear it all throughout, and then all of a sudden, this woman comes in, puts 2 small copper coins, and now the silence is deafening. Everyone knows how little she gave. And here's the thing, what she gave was incredibly insignificant. Mark tells us here exactly what it was worth. He says there's 2 small copper coins, and together those coins equaled about a penny. Now, a penny in our world today is incredibly insignificant, so insignificant that we stopped making the penny, all right? We just said, we don't need that anymore in our lives. Like, no one's picking it up off the ground. We're done with the penny, all right? And back in Jesus' day, a penny was also incredibly insignificant. You see, a penny was worth about 1/64 of a denarius. A denarius was worth about a day's wage. The average laborer in the Greco-Roman Empire worked about 12 hours a day, which means that a penny was worth less than 12 minutes of labor. That's it. Like all you had to do was work for 15 minutes and you would have more money than this person. It is incredibly insignificant. And yet, even though it was the smallest amount given that day, Jesus' attention is fully on it. And what's interesting is what Jesus actually tells them is that in light of everyone who's given, she actually gave the most. Look at the last 2 verses, 43 and 44. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. After this woman comes and gives the 2 small copper coins, Jesus turns to his disciples and says something that we don't really expect in this moment. He says, of everyone who's given, she gave the most. Now, here's the thing, numerically, that cannot possibly be true, right? Like there are other people giving large sums of money. You can hear it. They're giving way more than 2 small copper coins. And so why does Jesus say this? Well, because Jesus is God, Jesus is able to have a unique perspective. He is able to look at the heart of this woman and see something unique. And what he recognizes is that she gave all that she had. While everyone else was giving out of their abundance, Jesus says she gave out of her poverty. Now, here's the thing. I want you to recognize just how poor this woman really is, okay? Notice how Mark describes this woman. he describes her as the poor widow, those two words. Wouldn't you just love to have that nickname? Like, hey, I'm the poor widow. What a terrible nickname, right? Not Rebecca, the poor widow, right? Ugh. And whenever Mark describes her as poor, here's the thing, I think that might be the biggest understatement ever. Because whenever all you have is 2 small copper coins, a total of a penny, you're not poor, you're broke. And what Jesus tells us is that that's all she's got. It's not like she's got more in the bank somewhere else that she didn't bring forward, or more at home or whatever. This is it. She has all of it in these 2 small copper coins. She is completely broke. But not only is she described as poor, but she's also described as a widow. In other words, she also suffered already a great deal of loss. She's lost the life of her husband. She hasn't remarried. And in the Greco-Roman Empire, the husband was the primary source of income, which means that these 2 small copper coins is all that she had, and she didn't really have an income stream to get more, and yet still put it all down. In fact, think of it like this. Think about, like, what would be her income stream? Like, how could she get more money? The only way for her at this point in time was through the means of the temple. See, the whole reason why the temple collected money was, one, to help support the endeavors of worship happening inside the temple. But not only that, what we also see in the Old Testament is that the temple, what they would do is the priests would give money to the widows in order to support them in these trying times. And so when she shows up at the temple that day, here's what everyone's thinking. They're thinking, oh, she has come to receive. She's come to get. But notice what she does. She comes, and she doesn't just come to receive, she gives everything that she has. One commentator that I read this week as I was studying for this passage said that her putting those 2 small copper coins in that offering basket that day was equivalent to her just saying, this is my entire livelihood. Like, she surrendered her life. There's nothing else that she had. She gave all of it. And so what we see is that while others gave what they could spare, this woman spared nothing. She gave it all. And in doing so, what she shows us is she displays for us the call of the gospel to every single one of us. See, the call of the gospel to all of us is to lay ourselves down, to surrender all of it before Jesus. That's the call of the gospel. Whenever Jesus is with his disciples and they're talking about following him, here's what Jesus has to say in Matthew chapter 16. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Can you imagine what that would have felt like from the disciples when they heard Jesus say that? Like, the cross was an instrument of death. It was an instrument of torture. And what Jesus is saying is, hey, if you want to be my disciples, if you want to follow me, here's the thing, die. That's the invitation, is to lay it all down at his feet. No one says this better than Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great German preacher and author. He says, when Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. That's the invitation of the gospel. The invitation of the gospel is, yes, everlasting life, the fullness of joy, all these wonderful things. But it also means surrendering everything at the feet of Jesus. When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. And so what we see at the temple this day is this woman displays for us what Christ calls every single one of us to do through the means of the gospel. To lay our entire lives down at the cross of Jesus Christ. To put it all down before him. That's the call of the gospel. So here's the question that I have for us in light of this. 2 questions. 1, how do we do this? But before we get to the how, here's my next question. Why don't we? Why don't we do this? You see, here what I think is interesting about this passage is it not only shows us what the gospel calls every single one of us to do, but what I think it also does is it reveals the barriers to which we don't do this. In other words, we begin to see some of the excuses that we would make, because this woman doesn't make the same excuses that we would make. You see, I think there's at least 3 excuses that if we were this woman that we would make in light of generosity. the first excuse that we would make is we would say, I don't have anything to give. And the reality is, if that woman were to say that to us, we'd be like, yeah, you're right? Like we would say, please don't worry about giving. Like you need to receive in this moment. Nobody would argue with her if she were to say that. And yet what she does is she still gives it all. She doesn't make that excuse. She lays it all down. Another excuse that I think that we often make is we think to ourselves, well, I could give, but what I will give really won't make a big difference in the light of all things, so I won't worry about giving. It's like, I'm not gonna, it's like gonna help the church get the budget they need to get. So like, what's even the point of giving? And that's certainly the case here. Like 2 small copper coins, like the priests at the temple weren't like, man, we could go on that mission trip if we just had 1 more penny, right? Like that's not what they're thinking. It's not making the budget. It's not making a dent in the budget. But here's what it is doing. It's making a massive dent in her heart. Because here's what she recognizes. She recognizes that in this moment, that if she were to hold on to those 2 small copper coins, she would be trusting more in the little that she had rather than the God that she worships. See, generosity, yes, it helps fuel the mission of the church, but more importantly than that, it helps us combat and kill the idolatry of greed. That's what it does. It helps us kill the idol of greed in our life. And so here's the reality. Even if the church had infinite cash, like we were Scrooge McDuck, just swimming in gold coins, right? There would still be a need for every single one of us to practice generosity because it's killing the idol of greed in us. And that's what she recognizes. She doesn't make the excuse of, well, I could give this, but it won't really help, so I'll just hold on to it. She lays it all down, knowing that her heart needs it, that she needs to trust in God more than the little that she had. The third excuse that I think that we would often make is this, that we would give, that even though we're called to lay it all down, that what we would do is we would give in part and not the whole. See, there's a key description in this story that we need to make sure that we don't forget. How many coins does this woman have? 2. It's 2 small copper coins. You know what that means? It means she could have gave 1 and kept 1. And even if she were to have done that, we would still be in awe of her generosity, wouldn't we? We'd be like, this girl just gave 50% of everything she owned. That's wild. Who does that, right? We would still be in awe. But here's what she knows. She knows that what God's after is not 50% of her, not 20% of her, not 10% of her, not 90% of her, all of her. And what she does is she goes all in. She lays all of it down, 100%. All that she has, she surrenders before the Lord at this moment. Everything. She doesn't make the same excuses that you and I would make. She lays it all down. And so now here's the question for us. If this is the call of the gospel on our lives, wholehearted surrender, how do we do this? How do we follow her lead? And how do we do the same thing? And for some of you, whenever we ask that question, here's what you maybe are thinking. You're thinking, Chris, are you telling me that I need to sell everything I own and give everything to the church? And the answer is yeah, absolutely. How am I gonna afford my private jet, right? No, I'm kidding, that's a joke, all right? Please laugh at that joke, all right? Gosh, that was a little awkward for a moment. No, it's not what it means. Here's the reality, okay? There's a good chance God's not calling you to sell everything and give everything away, okay? But let me tell you what he is calling you to do. He is calling you to use everything for the glory of his name. He might not be calling you to give everything away, but he is calling you to use everything for the glory of his name. See, there's a really important distinction that we need to make in this passage, and that is the distinction between what's called prescriptive and descriptive, okay? And when it comes to interpreting the Bible, especially narratives that tell us what's happening, we need to be aware of how we interpret it, whether it's a descriptive way or a prescriptive way. And descriptive means this. It means that the author of this passage, in this case, Mark, is simply describing for us what happened. It's descriptive, describing the events unfolded at the temple, okay? Prescriptive is this idea that Mark is prescribing for us something to go and do. Big difference between the two. And here's the thing, it would be a huge misunderstanding to take this passage, which is descriptive, and to make it prescriptive. Because notice what happens, okay? This is important. Whenever Jesus sees what this woman does, he commends her for what she does, right? But notice what Jesus doesn't do. He doesn't command his disciples to go do the same thing. We don't see that happen. He commends the woman, yes. Celebrates the woman, yes. He commends her, but he doesn't look at his disciples and say, now you do it. He doesn't command them to do the same thing, which tells us that while God is probably not calling you to give it all away, he is calling you to use it all for the glory of his name. And so here's the big question I think we all need to ask ourselves today, okay? This is where all of this leads, this big question. And that question is this. The question is, how is my spending? The way that I manage my money, the way that I use my money, how is my spending magnifying the glory of God? That's the question. How is my spending, the way I use my money, magnifying the glory of God? Because here's the reality. The reality is the way you use your money and the way that you use your resources is telling a story. The question is, what story is it telling? And the story it's telling for every single one of us is it's showing us what we truly love the most. See, a few years ago, I was dating the most beautiful woman in the world that I eventually asked to be my wife. And at the moment, I knew that I wanted to marry Kristen. We've been dating for a little bit over a year at this point in time, and I was like, yes, like I'm all in on this. Like, she's gonna be a doctor, like what? Like I'm in, you know? And I was ready to propose to her, and when you propose, there's really kind of one thing that you need, and that is a ring to give to her, okay? The problem at the time, I didn't have a lot of money to go buy a ring. I just bought like my first house, which became our first house after we got married, and I didn't have a lot of money to go and buy the ring, but here's what I did have. I did have a car. See, my very first car when I turned 16 was a 1982 El Camino Super Sport. And yes, it was as cool as it sounded. It was awesome. My grandfather was a mechanic for the majority of his life. He found this thing in a junkyard, fixed it up for me. He put a V8 engine under the hood. Every time you turned it on, the whole thing growled at you. It was awesome. It was made of pure metal all the way around. You could rear end me, your car would be total, mine would be fine. It was a tank. I love this thing, got 6 miles to the gallon. It was unbelievable. I love this car. And at the time, it was not my primary vehicle. I used a different car to drive around. This was my project car. I was like, I'm gonna keep it in my garage. I'm gonna fix it up, all these kind of things. And I remember when I was ready to propose to Kristen, I didn't have a lot of money, but I did have a car. And I called my parents because my car was at their house. And I talked to my dad on the phone. I said, Dad, hey, I think I want to marry Kristen. I think I want to propose. And he was like, you should absolutely do that. She's way out of your league. Go for it, right? And I said, but Dad, in order to do that, I need to get a ring. And so here's what I want to do. I want to sell the car. And he was like, are you sure you want to sell this thing? Like, you love this car. You've had it for like almost a decade. Are you sure that you want to sell this thing? And I said, yeah, Dad, I'm sure. I want to sell the car. Sold the car in a few weeks. No surprise, classic car, easy to sell. Got the money. A few weeks later, bought a ring. A few weeks later, proposed on a beach in Texas. She said yes, obviously. Now we have 4 kids and we live in Tucson, right? Why do I tell you that story? It's because if you were to ask me in that moment, Chris, what do you love? How do you spend your money and use your resources? What does it say about what I love? Here's what it would communicate. It says, I love Kristen more than I love a car. That's what it would communicate. There's no way in the world you could say, I bet, man, Chris loves that car. Like, no, I sold that thing. I don't know who has it. What it would communicate is I really love this girl and I want her to be my wife, right? And the reality is the way that you spend your money is communicating what you love most. Here's the big question. Is it Jesus or is it something else? And here's the thing. I'm just gonna step on some toes here for a minute, if that's cool. For some of us, when we look at our spending, here's what it communicates. It communicates that what I value and what I love most is conveniences and comfort. And we can know just by the amount of times you've gone through that Cane's drive-thru, right? Some of you are like, that got real personal for me. But it does. It's like, well, that's what I value is conveniences. What I value is comfort. And if we were to look at how you use your money, what I value most is the pleasures of this world. That I invest in the high-end things to enjoy the most luxurious things. That's what it communicates. And for many of us, here's the thing. We will communicate with our words that we love God more than anything, but we don't communicate that with our wallet. And can I just be completely honest with you? If you are communicating with your words that you love God more than anything, but not your wallet, you probably don't love him more than anything. There's something else that has got a hold of your heart. The question is, what is it? Because the way we give communicates what we love, and it's the same with God. Think about the generosity of God for a minute and what it communicates to us. What does God give? His son. Who does he give it to? Us, for the purpose of reconciling us to him. He dies on the cross for you and for me. He rises from the grave. Why? So that we can have life. So that we can have heaven. So that we can have him. Do you remember the most famous verse in the entire Bible? John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he what? He gave. He gave. What motivated the generosity of God? Love. It was his love for us that motivated his generosity, in which he gave his son to a dying world to die for this world, for you and for me. The way we spend our money, the way we give, what we give our money to, communicates what we love most. The question for many of us is, what is it? For many of us, we would say with our words that we love God more than all things. But we don't really communicate that with our wallets. And the entire purpose of this series is to kill the idol of greed in our life. And the only antidote to greed is radical biblical generosity. So here's what we're gonna do as a church. We've been pointing to this every single week in this series, but we made this little discipleship guide. It says generosity at Doxa. And in this guide, we've been giving it out since the beginning of this whole series. In this guide has some FAQs about how we spend money here at Doxa. Also a little kind of 4-day or 4-week, however you want to break it up, little devotional guide for you so that you can really just pursue God in his word and consult with God in prayer of, God, where are you leading me when it comes to generosity? And if you have not yet picked one of these up, please, by all means, pick one of these up. We'll have them at the Connections lobby before you leave today. Make sure you grab one of these. But here's what we're gonna do. Inside of this guide is this little commitment card. It says generosity card. It's upside down on the bottom right here, okay? And what we're gonna do is next Sunday, okay, 7 days from now, we are gonna do what we call Commitment Sunday. And this is where we're gonna fill out the inside of each of these cards, and we're gonna bring them next Sunday, and we're gonna have a moment in our worship where we all just come forward and we lay them at the feet of Jesus, saying, God, I'm surrendering this to you. I'm laying it all down. I'm trusting that this is better in your hands than it is in mine. And it's gonna be a powerful, incredible time. And the reason we're doing this is because as a church, we want to be serious about killing the idol of greed in our life. I mean, just imagine what God would do with a church that truly says, God, we're laying it all down. Like the reason we're doing this is not because we want something from you, it's because we want something for you, and that's more of the fullness of life in Christ. That's what we want for you. To lay it all down. And so here's our goal. Our goal is not to fundraise a certain amount of money. We do not have a dollar amount in our head that we're hoping that we'll gain. Our only goal is for 100% participation in this. That every single person in these rooms would come together saying, God, I'm laying it all down at your feet. I'm taking the next step of killing the idol of greed in my life. 100% participation. Which means, college student in the room, let me talk about to you for a minute. This includes you, okay? And you might think, Chris, I don't have much money to give. And we've already hit that excuse. Neither did this woman. And you're like, I don't have a job. I don't have really any money coming in. It's hard to give off of $0. And I get that, but I'm guessing that to some degree you have some sort of spending money. That's my guess and assumption. And I just want to really, really challenge you right here and ask the question, what would it look like for you to sacrifice some of the conveniences and say, Lord, I'm going to lay them down instead? that you just change some of those patterns and those habits, saying, God, I'm gonna sacrifice these things before you. And that you get in that practice of working the muscle of radical biblical generosity now while you're in college, so that whenever God does entrust even more to you after college, that you're ready to work that muscle. That's what we want for you, okay? I promise you what you give is not gonna move our budget, okay? I want this for you. I want to help you kill the idol of greed in your life. And so again, our whole goal in this is not a dollar amount, it's 100% participation. And if you're in the room and you're thinking, Chris, it sounds like you're just trying to get our money from us, I can promise you that's not the case. In fact, after you bring these cards next week and you lay them down, we're gonna send you an email with some instructions on how to set up that giving through our online giving portal. And what you can do is, as you set those things up, is there's gonna be an option for you to select what we're calling the 90-day generosity challenge. And what we're gonna do is, for every single person that selects, I wanna give to the 90-day generosity challenge, we're gonna ask you to give for those 90 days. That's 3 months, we're gonna give for those 90 days. And then here's what we're gonna do at Doxa. We're gonna tally up the amount of money given through the 90-day generosity challenge, and we're gonna give, watch this, all of it away. 100% of what you give through that portal, we are giving all of it away. Just to show you that what we want from this is not something from you, we want something for you, and that is to kill the idol of greed, to bury it in the grave, and that in the process of doing so, to grab hold of more of Jesus himself. And again, just imagine what God would do with a church that says, Lord, everything we have is yours. We lay it all down before you. Guys, this is how revivals start. This is how movements start. It starts when we get serious about surrendering all of ourselves before him. And so next week, we're gonna take a big step as a church, and we're gonna lay it all down before him. You with me? Come on, let's go, church, let's go. All right, let me pray.